Okay, today's cardinal lesson, see through trusts for your IRA beneficiary. And this is under estate planning. This is what we're talking about is that you pass away and your beneficiaries receive the money in your IRA by beneficiary, and you're a little concerned about what they're going to do with it. You might want to look at one of these see-through trusts. So I want to push it to Tom, and I want Tom to share, like, why are we doing this video today? What's the purpose of this?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this video because with IRAs and 401ks, you can name a beneficiary. And we love doing that with a lot of clients. And the real benefit of that is your beneficiaries get the money right away. One of the downsides to naming a beneficiary is they get the money right away. And you might not want to do that, right? You might have reasons that specifically with your IRA and 401k that you don't want to hand all that money to your kids or whoever it is. And you can use trust to accomplish that goal, but it needs to be done properly. There's a lot of rules around it, nuance that you need to know. So we want to do this video today to walk you through how best to set up a trust to inherit an IRA in the proper way if you have some concern of just giving the money to your kids, for example, upon your passing. So let me bring up the show notes here. You can find these at the link below our video. They're also on our website at cardinalguide.com. We have the board like we always do. It's pretty light on the show notes today. We have like a one-page handout that really just goes over the stuff on the board. But if you want to print it out, read it a little bit more closely, it's there, just some context of what's on the board. But I think we're going to spend most of today going through the board sort of piece by piece, walking through how to set up the trust, what type of trust, when you might want to use it, when you might not. And so I'll turn it back to Hans and we'll just go from here.
Okay, so a see-through trust, it's also known as a look-through trust. And what the whole idea is the IRS can see through the trust to the beneficiary because there's tax implications, there's required minimum distributions, there's the 10-year rule, that possibly for some types of beneficiaries, there's the special beneficiaries, so they can stretch it longer than the 10 years. And when the IRA goes to a trust, then there's very strict rules on distribution when a trust actually owns an IRA. So the IRS can see through the trust to the beneficiary so that the beneficiary can take advantage of the distribution rules. We'll just call it that. Now, there's really 4 situations where one of these trusts is something you might want to look at is to protect children or grandchildren. I mean, with your IRA money, to control how and when dollars are distributed. So if you have some concern that one of your kids is going to take their half of the IRA money and just take it all out at once, which they're entitled to do, and then they're going to have a big tax bill, and they're going to have a huge income year, a high tax rate, high tax bill, and you're just concerned with them doing that and then blowing what's left. I mean, that might be something that you want to think about. And it's just protect assets from creditors, divorces, and poor decisions. If you're looking ahead and you're thinking that one of your children might be getting divorced or already divorced or in credit situations, when they become the beneficiary and they actually receive this money, people can come after it. If you put it into a trust that the IRS can see through for distributions, perhaps you could get some protection there. And then required minimum distribution compliance to make sure that your kid does whatever they're supposed to do with the money in terms of the IRS, so they distribute it properly and maybe they don't distribute too much. So this is just giving you some general ideas of where this would be appropriate. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think we look at these 4, and I think these 4 are very good reasons to potentially set up that. One thing that you will know is not on that list, which is oftentimes what we hear people, the reason they set up the trust is avoiding probate, right? If that is the only reason that you're setting up a trust, beneficiary designations also avoid probate, right? So if I have my IRA, I don't have any concern of leaving it to my kids. Right, they're financially stable. There's no issues. They're happily married. For whatever reason, there's no concern from my standpoint. Naming them as a beneficiary is simpler than naming a trust. Right, it's less steps, less issues. Most kids don't even know what a trust is, so they got to really learn on the fly when they inherit this money. Avoiding probate is not a reason to name a trust as a beneficiary. But if you do have some concern over giving the money, maybe they're financially, you don't trust them, or there's been substance abuse issues, or they're in a marriage that you're not real sure where that's going. I mean, there's reasons to do it. But again, there needs to be clear reasons. And unfortunately, we see a lot of times people just get a blanket statement, oh, set up a trust, it's the best way to leave money, which trusts are very wonderful when used appropriately and for the right reasons. But I think sometimes it can be oversold when it's maybe there's a simpler way to get to the end goal there. So that's just a word of caution. But ultimately, the ones we've listed on the board, I think, are really good reasons. Another one that's sort of in there too would be, like special needs trust, right? If you have a child who has special needs, they're on Medicaid, you want to preserve their ability to get state benefits, that would be another really great reason to name a trust. That's not the main focus of today's call, but that's just another one, an example of why you might want to name a trust as a beneficiary of the IRA. So I'll turn it back to Hans. We'll keep going.
Sure. So the look-through trust, I mean, really the only is control. I mean, the purpose of it is control. And what I want to state is my first inclination is to tell people no. So, like, for most people, I'm against these. And the reason I'm against these is there's this, that it's just going to set up another layer of difficulty. It's another opportunity for a whole bunch of mistakes in the distribution of the thing. So I'm going to lean toward not doing one of these. But in doing my job properly, when I have a sensitivity to people in planning that they're really concerned about, like they pass away and this money passes so easily and so quickly after their death that they're concerned about what their kids are going to do with it if they're the beneficiaries or their nephew or whoever it is. And then I'm all for it. And then once I'm all for it, we got to do this right. And so when you're picking an attorney to do a see-through trust, you better know that they have some experience with these and that they've had specific training. And these all, the requirements for this stuff all changed during the Secure Act. Secure Act 1 and then Secure Act 2.0 were a few years ago. But so they need to have experience. The attorney needs to have experience in doing this, and it needs to be fresh experience because they've got to put certain provisions into this trust to make it valid. Now, to qualify as a see-through trust, all four of these must be true. Number one is the trust is valid under state law. Well, that kind of goes without saying. The trust must be irrevocable. And there's a lot of revocable trusts that are out there, and that's appealing, is to set up a trust that you can later revoke. But this needs to be an irrevocable trust, a see-through trust, or at the very least, it becomes irrevocable at your death, at the IRA owner's death. All beneficiaries must be identifiable people. All beneficiaries. So they must be able to be identified within the trust. You can't have one kind of unknown person in there. They need to be identifiable, and that's identifiable by the IRS. You can't put charities, estates, or non-persons down as beneficiaries of a see-through trust. And the fourth thing is a copy of the trust must be provided to the IRA custodian by October 31st of the year after death. So when you set up one of these trusts, you can go to all your IRAs and you can name the trust as the beneficiary. That's all the custodian wants to know from you, is that where do we send the money when you die? Okay. And you can name the trust, but before you actually get the money there, by October 31st of the year after death, the custodian has to actually get a copy of the trust. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think these lay out the rules. These are good things to really, if you're talking to an attorney, sort of, you don't want to quiz them like, like they're doing anything wrong. But if they start saying things that don't line up with this, that would be a good reason. It should raise some red flags, really ask more about, have they done this with other clients? And really, if you're in a situation where you're thinking about setting up a trust, and maybe you have other assets that you also want to go into the trust, so you have IRA money, non-IRA money, maybe your house, other property, different things, you might really heavily consider having two separate trusts. One that accepts the IRA, meets all these rules, is able to be handled properly, and walks through all the distributions properly and stuff. And then the other trust that handles everything else, because you can get a lot more rules and control over the other money. Because the problem with the IRA money, the underlying piece that causes issue here, is the Secure Act, that those IRAs have to be distributed. If you have a non-spousal beneficiary of an IRA, there's some exceptions, but for generally, it has to be emptied by the end of the 10th year after they inherit the account. So you die, let's say 2026, following the year of death. So 2027, 10 years later, that account has to be emptied by the end of 2036 and completely outside of the IRA. That ultimately is what causes issues with IRAs and trusts. And then it's like, where do the taxes go? Do they stay in the trust? We'll get to that in a second. Do they get passed to the beneficiaries? And so if you have 10 years you got to do something with, you might want more control over that money after 10 years. That's where having another trust could be very beneficial potentially. So that just really consider that. But if you're talking about specifically with IRA, these are the rules that need to be met for it to be considered this see-through trust, which ultimately is the way you want to set this up to inherit an IRA.
If we do your financial planning for you, we're in all 50 states and DC. We work through Zoom. We'll find you an attorney, and we have several that we can refer to who are specialists of these things. We don't need to teach them anything or question them about anything, but understand, if you go through us, we'll help you find that. If you do this on your own, just make sure you vet this attorney. And I just ask them, how many see-through trusts for the purposes of IRA beneficiaries have they done? And they might call them look-through trusts. I just quiz them on that. And if that number was 10 or less, I might go to somebody else.
The other thing I will make a comment on this is, when you look at the trust languages, you're not going to see it anywhere that calls it a look-through trust or see-through trust, right? I mean, that's sort of a term that's used to describe what it's doing, but it's not like an official type of trust. When you look at it, you're not going to see that language on there. And that's where you need to understand like what the qualifications are to meet those things for the benefit of the IRA. So that's just a word of caution, right? You might look at it and say, oh, it doesn't say see-through on here. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not, but it needs to meet these qualifications to be considered that.
That's good, Tom. And there's really, there's a conduit trust and there's an accumulation. And a conduit trust is just like the word implies, is the money goes into the trust as a conduit to get it to the beneficiaries. Okay. An accumulation trust is designed, the money goes into the trust and it stays in the trust, and they do the distributions inside of there because it's designed to accumulate money. So most of the see-through trusts, I would say that all of them that we've been part of them doing, when an attorney did them, were conduit trusts. The whole idea is just to see through the trust have the control, but then the IRS, for tax purposes, is seeing through the trust to the beneficiary. Okay, so where does a see-through trust make sense? Minor beneficiaries, blended families. I got a situation going right now where we set up estate planning for this couple like 10, 12 years ago. And blended family, different kids, stepkids, kids, and the gentleman has dementia. It's going to end up going well, but this would be a place that you might want to look at this. Beneficiary is financially irresponsible. Protection from lawsuits or divorce. And you want professional trustee oversight of what's going on with your money. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think this sort of mirrors a little bit of why you might want to do it on the left side of the board. All of those are sort of good reasons. One thing on the accumulation trust, right, it does provide more protection, right, because it stays within the trust. It's not being distributed out. from a tax standpoint is the least efficient tax wise. Because if you start looking at trust tax rates, you get to the 37% very quickly, right? So on the conduit trust, where it's going through the trust out to the beneficiaries are paying tax at their tax rate, which again are just what you're used to, 10, 12, 22, 24%. Trust tax rates are the same brackets. You just get to them much, much more quickly, right? So you start getting into $16,000 of income in a trust, which is not a huge amount of RMDs to get there. That's going to cause it to be taxed. Every dollar after that's being taxed at 37% rate. So that's the reason that these accumulation trusts aren't always the best thing for IRAs. Again, you might need to do it because you just don't want to give the money to the kids and you're willing to pay the tax, which, if so, then that's fine. But if that's really the goal, there might be better ways to do it, right? You might consider buying life insurance with the money that you have now. Get it out of the IRA, purchase the life insurance, because then the life insurance could be left to some type of accumulation trust. So there's other planning things. I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but just know accumulation trust provides the most protection, provides the most control, is the worst tax wise of the ones that we're talking about here. And then, again, the see-through trust makes sense. I agree with the list that's on the board here. Ultimately, if you want some control, whether the kids are minors, you don't trust them, or whatever it is, that's where the see-through trust really makes sense to set up.
Okay. Common mistakes that we see: trusts without IRA specific language. This is just made the beneficiary the trust, but then the trust doesn't have the specific see-through language and it hasn't met those four criteria. Leaving charities inside the trust is, if you're going to leave your money to a charity or some of your IRA money, charities don't pay taxes. Name them as the beneficiary or a partial beneficiary or a contingent beneficiary after your spouse. We can talk about that with you, but that's a mistake inside of these. Outdated pre-Secure Act trusts, so that the trust was made as a see-through trust, but it was made in 2015 and it hasn't passed all the Secure Act tests, so that needs to be looked at. It might be okay, but there might be some additional provisions that need to be added to make it work. Not coordinating the trust with tax planning. We see this a lot where people just did a trust because they want to do a trust. Well, IRAs and beneficiaries are all about tax planning. And so if your children draw out all the IRA money in the first year because they need or want the money, and let's just say their part is $300,000 and they otherwise make $100,000 a year as their income, is that whole $300,000 is going to be added on top of their $100,000, and they're going to have an income that year of $400,000. So some tax planning we could do for them right away is we could say, you're going to be better off spreading this out over 10 years, which is the longest you can spread it out, or you might be better off just taking 50,000 of it out and then spreading the rest out over the 9 years. There's all kinds of options. Is a lot of people have just gone to the trust because they want control, and they really didn't do the tax planning first. Tom?
Yeah, and I think this speaks to that comment I made earlier, where it really could make some sense to potentially have two separate trusts. One that it just deals with the IRA, because then you have the language that's very specific to the IRA. It meets all the rules. There's no confusing things with other language with other money. And then you have another trust with everything. That's going to prevent a lot of these common mistakes. And so that was something to consider if you really do want to go the trust route. But again, some other mistakes that I've seen, I've seen people be told to put their IRA in the trust while they're still alive. The only way to do that is to pull it out and pay taxes on it. That's not a good idea. And then ultimately, just thinking through what kind of the tax implications are on this, because one of the things with IRA money is that money is going to get taxed at some point. A lot of our planning is trying to get that money out in the most tax efficient way. Trust could cause complications there. And then ultimately, if you just don't have any concern of leaving the money to the kids, or you don't really want that control post death, you kind of like let them figure it out when they get it. maybe give them some instructions, but at the end of the day, you're going to be dead anyways. You're not going to know what they did. A lot of the times it's just simpler to leave it directly to the kids. So again, not always, right? There's reasons to do it, but I think I'm with Hans. Like our base level, where our starting point is let's see if we can do this without using trust, specifically for the IRA money. And then if needed, then let's make sure we do it right. And again, these are some of the common areas that we see mistakes on.
Okay. So today we've been talking about IRA 401k, like the whole show. We've been talking about estate planning, and we've been talking about taxes. But this is a piece of your overall financial plan. You come to us for financial planning. We hear some of these issues. You have an IRA large enough, we might consider one of these, but we're going to put you through some tests with it. I'd like to bring Tom back on. I'm Hans Scheil.
And I'm Tom Griffith.
And we thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.